A Silicon Valley startup sparks a global obsession, and within a decade, its $7 billion empire collapses in spectacular fashion. Atari went from inventing home gaming to becoming the face of chaos, creative anarchy, dizzying profits, and then catastrophic mistakes. How could the company that sold 30 million consoles lose control so completely? The answer lies in a story most people have never truly heard. In 1972, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney founded Atari in a rented office in Sunnyvale, California. The company's name came from the game of Go, a warning call meaning you are in danger of being captured. That sense of playful risk defined Atari's earliest days. Workbenches overflowed with wires, soldering irons, and half-finished prototypes. Engineers wandered in at odd hours, fueled by pizza, caffeine, and the thrill of making something no one had seen before. There were no dress codes, no sign-in sheets, and barely any rules. The office was a constant hum of laughter, music, and the clatter of arcade machines being stress-tested by their own creators. Bushnell encouraged a spirit that was equal parts mischief and invention. Pranks were routine. On slow afternoons, someone might wire a coworker's chair to deliver a mild shock, or sneak in a new game hack when no one was looking. The team celebrated wins with beer in the lab and late-night hot tub parties. Titles and hierarchy meant little. The best ideas won, whether they came from a technician or the founder himself. Bushnell was rarely behind a desk. He preferred to be in the workshop, testing games, swapping stories, or pushing for the next breakthrough. This atmosphere produced results nobody expected. In August 1972, the team installed the first Pong machine in Andy Capp's tavern. Within days, the coin box jammed from too many quarters. Bushnell fielded a call from the bar owner who thought the machine had broken. Instead, it was overflowing with coins, a sign that video games had found a new audience. Word spread quickly. Other bars lined up, eager for their own Pong cabinets. Atari's workshop became a round-the-clock operation, with technicians building machines by hand, sometimes sleeping on the floor to keep up with demand. The culture was loose, but it was also fiercely loyal. Engineers felt like pioneers, building something from scratch. The open workshop, the freedom to tinker, and the willingness to break the rules attracted creative minds who might have chafed in a more traditional company. This environment drove Atari's early success, but it also planted the seeds for future challenges. As the company grew, the same informality that powered invention would soon clash with the demands of rapid expansion and outside investment. For now, though, Atari was the wild heart of Silicon Valley, a place where fun came first and anything seemed possible. In 1977, Atari introduced the video computer system, later known as the 2600. At first glance, it looked like a simple plastic box with wood grain trim and a pair of joysticks, but inside was a revolution. The 2600 was the first widely successful home console to use interchangeable ROM cartridges, turning the game machine into a platform rather than a single-purpose toy. No longer did a family have to buy a new console every time they wanted a new game. Instead, swapping out a cartridge changed the experience instantly, unlocking new worlds with a click and a push. This technical leap was born from the workbench chaos of Atari's engineering team. Designers like Joe DeQuire and Jay Miner focused on making the hardware flexible enough to handle games no one had even imagined yet. They had to squeeze every ounce of performance out of the custom TIA chip and a tiny amount of memory, just 128 bytes of RAM. The result was a system that could surprise even its own creators. Early games were simple, but as programmers learned to push the limits, the 2600 delivered hits like Space Invaders, Asteroids, and Adventure, each more ambitious than the last. The impact was immediate and enormous. In its first year, the 2600 sold modestly, but after a slow start, demand exploded. Over its lifetime, Atari would move around 30 million units, filling living rooms across America and beyond. The cartridge model did not just change how games were played, it changed how they were made and sold. Suddenly, game development became a race to create the next big title, and a single console could become the centerpiece of a family's entertainment for years. The 2600's success caught the attention of major corporations. Warner Communications, a media giant, saw the potential and acquired Atari in 1976, just as the console was gearing up for launch. With corporate resources behind them, the pressure grew to scale up production and feed a growing appetite for new games. Atari's engineering spirit, rooted in experimentation and freedom, gave way to the challenge of meeting massive, unpredictable demand. The cartridge, once a symbol of creative possibility, became the engine driving Atari's transformation from scrappy upstart to industry powerhouse. The stage was set for explosive growth and for the tensions that would soon reshape the company from the inside. Warner Communications closed its acquisition of Atari for $28 million in October 1976, bringing the scrappy startup under the wing of a corporate giant. The deal handed Nolan Bushnell a windfall, roughly $15 million personally, and locked him into a non-compete agreement that would shadow his next moves. For Warner, Atari looked like a ticket into the future of entertainment, a company with a hit product, a flood of orders, and a culture that seemed to print money out of thin air. But the ink on the purchase was barely dry before differences in governance came into focus. Warner installed its own oversight, channeling major decisions through boardrooms in New York rather than the workshop in Sunnyvale. Bushnell, still CEO in title, found himself answering to Warner's executive vice president, Manny Gerard, who questioned Atari's freewheeling spending and loose structure. Gerard brought in Ray Kasser, a seasoned executive from the textile industry, to instill discipline. Kasser's arrival was quiet at first, but his influence grew quickly. By 1978, he was promoted to president and began taking control of Atari's finances, manufacturing, and product lines. Strategic decisions that once happened over pizza and soldering irons now required approval from layers of management and Warner's corporate finance teams. Inside Atari, the change landed like a cold front. The open-door, prank-heavy culture gave way to a new sense of order. Dress codes appeared. Hours became fixed. Budgets tightened. The company's famously informal parties faded, replaced by quarterly reports and performance reviews. Engineers who once felt like pioneers now found themselves working under what they saw as a rigid top-down regime. Kasser, who once described Atari's developers as high-strung prima donnas, made little effort to hide his priorities. For him, the future of Atari was about meeting targets, controlling costs, and pushing product out the door on schedule. The friction was immediate. Bushnell's authority shrank as Kasser's grew, and the boardroom became the battleground for Atari's soul. Bushnell pushed for continued investment in research and development and new projects, but Kasser and Gerard pushed back, demanding predictable growth and more control. The tension boiled over in debates about the Atari 2600, with Warner's board overruling Bushnell's doubts and doubling down on the console. By the end of 1978, Bushnell was out, his non-compete clause in effect, and Kasser was CEO. The company that once thrived on chaos and invention now answered to quarterly earnings and corporate discipline. Atari was no longer just a Silicon Valley experiment, it was Warner's bet on the future, and every decision would be measured in dollars, deadlines, and market share. By 1982, Atari's breakneck expansion had turned it from a Silicon Valley curiosity into an American obsession. The company's gross income soared to $415 million that year, making it the crown jewel of Warner Communications and the envy of every entertainment giant. Across the country, television screens flashed with Atari's relentless advertising. Commercials promised the future of fun, featuring celebrities and families gathered around the glowing wood-grain console. Department stores set up PlayStations in their aisles, and holiday shoppers elbowed through crowds to grab the latest cartridges. Atari's marketing budget climbed into the tens of millions, dwarfing rivals and blanketing the airwaves with the Atari logo. The public response was electric. Kids swapped high scores on playgrounds, and parents lined up outside electronics stores on release days. At the height of the craze, stories spread of children skipping homework and adults staying up all night to master Space Invaders or asteroids. In living rooms from Seattle to Miami, the clatter of joysticks became a new soundtrack for American evenings. The mania wasn't just in the numbers or on the screen, it was in the way people began to see themselves as players. In 1982, a National Space Invaders tournament drew thousands of entrants, each hoping to claim the title of champion. For many, it was the first time a video game competition felt as legitimate as Little League or a spelling bee. One teenager, fresh from a small town in Ohio, described the feeling of walking into the tournament hall. It was like stepping onto another planet. The noise, the lights, the sense that everyone here was part of something huge. Behind the scenes, Atari's leadership watched the sales figures climb and pushed for more. Each quarter brought new pressure to top the last, to ship more consoles, to launch more games, to keep the excitement burning. The company's identity began to shift, from a haven for tinkerers and dreamers to a revenue machine with no off switch. Expectations soared, but so did the risk. The higher Atari climbed, the more it depended on feeding the frenzy, and the harder it became for anyone inside to imagine what would happen if the music stopped. In 1979, a quiet rebellion began to reshape the video game industry from the inside out. Four of Atari's top programmers, David Crane, Alan Miller, Bob Whitehead, and Larry Kaplan, were fed up. Their games had generated tens of millions in cartridge sales, yet their paychecks looked the same as the day they started. When they asked for royalties and credit, Chief Executive Officer Ray Kasser dismissed them, telling Crane he was no more important than the assembly line workers. That single meeting convinced the group that Atari would never reward its creators. Within months, they walked out and founded Activision, the first independent game publisher for the Atari, 2600. Activision's founders brought a new philosophy. Programmers deserved recognition and a share of the profits. Every Activision game box featured the designer's name and photo, a sharp contrast to Atari's anonymous approach. Their business model offered royalties, attracting top talent and setting a new standard for compensation. But Activision's impact went beyond morale. To avoid legal trouble, the team reverse-engineered the Atari 2600 in a clean room process, proving that anyone with the right skills could make compatible games. Atari sued, but the case settled with Activision paying a small royalty per cartridge, opening the platform to third parties for good. The result was a flood. By 1982, dozens of publishers crowded store shelves with hundreds of new cartridges. Some, like Imagic, followed Activision's focus on quality. Others saw only a gold rush, churning out games as fast as possible. Atari's control over its own system slipped away, and the marketplace filled with titles of wildly varying quality. What began as a quest for recognition had unlocked a wave of competition that Atari could not contain. Howard Scott Warshaw sat across from Atari's executives in July 1982, staring down a deadline that defied belief. The company had just secured the rights to E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the year's biggest movie, and management wanted the game in stores by Christmas. That left 5 weeks, 36 days to design, code, test, and manufacture a title they expected would sell millions. There was no time for second thoughts. The marketing campaign was already rolling. Retailers had placed huge orders, and Warner's board demanded a holiday blockbuster. Warshaw, who had just finished the hit game Yar's Revenge, knew the timeline was impossible. Most games took at least 6 months, but saying no was not an option. The deal was signed, the schedule fixed. Every day counted. Warshaw worked in a haze of exhaustion, coding for 18 hours at a stretch, sleeping in his office, and surviving on vending machine snacks. The pressure was relentless. Bugs slipped through, features were trimmed, and the game's core mechanics, E.T. falling into pits and searching for phone pieces, remained unfinished until the last minute. Atari's assembly line started production before the final code even cleared quality checks. Nearly 5 million cartridges rolled out in time for the holidays, riding on the promise of Spielberg's name and Atari's reputation. When the game hit shelves in December, the backlash was swift. Kids unwrapped E.T. expecting magic and found confusion. The gameplay felt awkward, the objectives unclear, and frustration set in almost immediately. Disappointed parents flooded stores with returns. Within months, warehouses overflowed with unsold copies. For many, E.T. became the symbol of everything that had gone wrong, an industry sprinting so fast it forgot to look where it was going. Atari's fortunes collapsed with a speed that stunned Wall Street. By the end of 1983, the company recorded $536 million in losses, one of the largest in American business history at the time. Warehouses overflowed with unsold cartridges and consoles, the byproduct of runaway forecasts in a market flooded with games no one wanted. Retailers, burned by overstock and angry customers, slashed prices and returned millions of units, turning Atari's once prized inventory into a financial anchor. The scale of the disaster reached far beyond balance sheets. In the high desert outside Alamogordo, New Mexico, a convoy of trucks arrived under cover of darkness in September 1983. Workers dumped what was estimated to be millions of unsold cartridges, consoles, and hardware into a municipal landfill. The burial was sealed in concrete, intended to erase the evidence of excess. For decades, rumors swirled about what had been hidden in the sand until a 2014 excavation unearthed cartridges still recognizable after 30 years, confirming the legend was real. The image of Atari's games entombed in the desert became a symbol of corporate hubris and waste. Warner Communications, once so eager to trumpet Atari's success, now scrambled to distance itself from the wreckage. In July 1984, the company split Atari in two, keeping the arcade division and offloading the hemorrhaging consumer business to Jack Tramiel's group. Tramiel took control of the new Atari Corporation, with Warner retaining a minority stake. The deal was less a sale than a surrender, trading away a division that had lost its luster and left behind a cautionary tale. What began as a $7 billion dream ended in silence, buried beneath the desert and the weight of its own ambition. Today, the gaming industry generates over $180 billion each year. Yet the ghost of Atari's collapse still shapes every launch, every risk. As tech giants chase scale, the lesson endures. Innovation can't outrun hubris. The real game isn't just building worlds, it is surviving them. What do you think? Has the industry truly learned? Or are we always one misstep away from history repeating?